everybody, welcome to Fun with Flags. Oh no, that's not right. I think it's welcome to Papa's Workshop. And this is for Adam, Brady, Luke, and Brenna. And hopefully you guys are doing pretty well with this virus thing. It's kind of like a bad storm. Just can't do anything outside, can't go anywhere, but just like a bad storm, this is going to be over before we know it. So hope you guys are hanging in there. Let's talk about bench planes. We start with the antique. Prior to the mid-1800s, all the planes were wooden like this. Some were manufactured like this one. Other ones were made mostly by their owner. And it's just a simple wedge like this that holds the blade in place, and it's set at a 45-degree angle. And they work pretty well. It's just that they're difficult to adjust. You've got to have the right tension on that wedge to hold it in place, but not so tight that when you adjust it by hitting the front of this, the blade should move down slightly, and when you hit it in the back, it should move up slightly. If you have it too tight, then that doesn't happen. So it takes quite a bit of practice to get that right. And then you don't have any adjustment for the mouth opening. We'll talk about that. So it has some limitations. About in the late 1800s, Stanley introduced a line of planes, metal planes, and they were the largest tool company in the world around 1900. Sort of the Star Wars franchise of tool works, if you say. And they made some improvements. You can adjust the blade up and down with this little dial. So, you know, that you can even do that while you're using the plane. Your index finger can roll that. And then they have this lever up here, which moves the blade this way to get it lined up in there. So it's much easier to adjust. And there's a way to adjust the opening on that mouth. We'll take this one apart. Let's see. This is the leveler cap, and this is the blade and the chip breaker. So you slide that down away from the blade, and that's the chip breaker. So it goes on top, and as the chips come up, it pushes them around and makes that curl. The blade itself, we've got the bevel part that's been ground, and then the face. And those two surfaces have to be smooth. That's what gives you your point. All edges have two surfaces that meet, right? So in these planes, these standing planes, that bevel goes down, right? That's how it goes in there. And then this is the frog, and that determines on these bevel down planes, that determines the angle of attack. And that's important when we talk about chip out. These are all 45 degree. These Stanley planes are all at 45 degrees. You can get a frog at a steeper angle, especially today. This is a newer bevel down plane, and it has a 50-inch frog, and it's, if you can tell, that's got a little slightly different angle to it. And this is the lateral adjustment. This little bar fits in the slot in the blade, and then that turns the blade. And then this little paw here, when you turn this dial, that little paw is moving. I don't know if you can see that, but that paw goes up and down, and that's actually the slot on the leveler or the chip breaker that moves the whole blade assembly up and down. This is the tote, the handle here, and then the knob in the front. And the planes are all basically the same in that regard. They differ a little bit in how you move the frog, but that's pretty much it. And there was a period of time where they had Stanley made a transition plane. It's a wood-bodied, but it has all the metal mechanisms and adjustments on top. And so they came in all these different sizes that you see here too, even that giant one there in the back. So So why do they have so many? Stanley made them because they were the rules. They ruled the roost of the tool world. Their numbering system became basically the de facto standard. They started with a number 1 plane, which was smaller than this one, and it's basically worthless. It's a cute looking plane, but they didn't make many, and it's a collector's item. This is a number 2, and then there's a 3, a 4. This is a 4.5 I took apart, a 5, 6, and a 7, and then they made an 8 I don't have. But you don't need all of these planes to work and make a board flat. I mean, that's what these bench planes do, is make the board flat and square. Basically, you need just 3 of these planes. And basically, think of it as coarse, medium, and fine. That's from Christopher Schwartz. He's an author on hand tools. So the first plane you start with a rough board. First thing you want to do is get it roughly flat. And you would do that with a jack plane. Usually that's about a number 5 or a number 6, about this long. And it has to do with the way the blade is shaped. The blade has about an 8-inch radius on the top. It's not flat. So it takes out a big scallop chunk out of the wood. And you can move a lot of material really fast with this, and that gets you to roughly where you want to be. And then you want to actually make the thing flat. You want a long plane, and that's what this number 6 and number 7 are for. Those are joiners, and the reason you want it long is that planes don't actually cut flat. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but this is the bottom of the plane, and this is the blade coming down. There's the bevel. So you end up, if that's the end of the plane here, you end up with a circle or an arc determined by the tip here. So you actually scallop it out. So the shorter that is, then the deeper that curve gets. So you want a really long plane so that doesn't become noticeable. And you can actually overplane. If you plane too much, especially with the smaller ones, you'll start dishing it out like that. So that's why you need a long one to do the joiner. To make things flat, you use the long joiner's plane, and you're gonna plane the wood, and you get that to where it's pretty much perfectly flat, as flat as that. Then you come back with what they call a smoother, and that's going to be a shorter plane, usually a number 4 or like this 4.5, sometimes a 3, and you're going to take just a very, very fine shaving off of it, and the blade is almost dead flat, just a little bit curve on the end. Some people like to round the corners so you don't get a jagged edge. And basically that was their version of sandpaper, is you take that plane and just plane a real fine thing, and then it's ready to put on a finish, your shellac or whatever. Now, today's tools, with the modern metals and manufacturing techniques, they've come up with these you can get them on all these different sizes. This is the bevel down plane, bevel up plane, sorry. So it doesn't have a frog, it just has the body itself, and it's going to be a really low angle, and then this really thick blade goes up on top, and it doesn't need a chip breaker, mostly because of this big fat blade. And the angle of attack on this is determined by the angle of the bed plus the angle that's on the bevel of this blade. So if this was at 20 degrees for this on the bed, and this was at 25 degrees, you'd have 45-degree angle of attack like these other planes. And why is that important? Has to do with chip out. Chip out looks like this. I don't know if you can see it on that. See the chip out up here? You got these big jagged holes. That's because the plane was going this way and it's grabbing those fibers and it makes chip out. So if you got your block of wood here and the fibers are going this way and you plane this way, it's going to want to take each one of those and pull it out, and you'll end up with those little chip out holes right there. So you have to plane with the grain of the wood. But sometimes you get a block of wood that's got curly in it like this, and then what do? You gotta plane one way or the other, and that's where this higher angle of attack comes from. If you increase the frog to the 50 degrees or 55 degrees or even 60 degrees, that makes it less likely to try to pull those fibers up because it's a blunt thing. But the trade-off is it's harder to push the iron. So like I said, these bevel down planes, you have to change the frog. So it's not, you can't really go back and forth. With these bevel up planes, since it adds the two together, if you change the bevel on the blade, you can change your angle of attack. If I increase that blade from 25 to 35, then I've got a 55 degree angle of attack, and the chip out is going to be less. It's going to be harder to push, but the less likely I'm going to get chip out, even if I'm going on that squirrely grain. And also you can fight it by closing that mouth. If you've taken a really fine shavings, close that mouth down so just barely the shavings can get through, and a higher angle of attack, you can actually plane in the wrong direction and get pretty decent results. Sharp blade too. One other quick comment is, if you see me setting these down this way, that's what you should do. And some people will tell you that you put them this way. You don't lay them down on their sides. You tend to knock out that lateral adjustment, the blade alignment that's going this way when you do that. If you set them down on a wood surface, you will not hurt them. Don't drop them or don't throw them, but if you just set them down on a wood surface and you're not going to be doing that on the wood, and that's just fine. That's how you take. The only thing you want to be careful of when you storm is that they don't bump each other and create a little nick on the corner, and then when you plane, you'll get a big scratch. And I think that's about all I need to cover. Mostly we need to practice using these. And in that vein, I've got a set of number 3s like this that I'm going to refurbish for each one of you. And they're on the small side for me, but as you know, for your size right now, they're probably going to feel a little big. But as you get bigger, they're still useful planes. I use my 3 for a lot of littler things. I find it's easier to handle on the edge of a board. You don't have the big wide things, easier to balance on there. So it's a good all-purpose plane, and that'll be a good starter. The main thing is you're going to need a bench. Hand tools, you need a bench, a stout bench that won't move around when you push on it. So we'll have to work something out with that too. Hope you guys are going to be able to see each other soon with this virus thing, but in the meantime, we'll try to do some more PAPA workshops. See ya.